Hello, everyone, and welcome to Neo's Arcade News. I am Neo Hyper 64, and that is not the name my mother gave me. But if you're into home arcade gaming, you might know my Neo Hyper 64 username from the Arcade 1UP subreddit, where I've been a member for a number of years, and I currently serve as a co moderator. But before we dive into all of that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about this channel, and then towards the end of this video, a few specific reasons why you might want to come back. So let's get into it. Like many of us in the home arcade space, I am a Gen Xer, and in my professional life, I spent the better part of 3 decades in marketing, working with agencies, brands, a whole lot of product launches, that sort of thing. But before that, I had a short stint in electronics logistics. I learned a little bit about how manufacturing and shipping from China really works. All the time on the water, Chinese holidays, all that good stuff. I also learned I am terrible at logistics, which is why I don't do that anymore. But before all of that, back when I was in high school in the early 90s or so, I was the guy behind the plexiglass at your local Toys R Us, handing out games to kids and their parents for about 4 years. Those were the glory days of home gaming in my mind. It was Super Nintendo, Genesis, TurboGrafx, and eventually the Neo Geo. And if Neo Geo sounds like something familiar related to my name, you might be right. More on that in a minute. So growing up, I loved spending time in the arcade. And that's where my passion for gaming really began. And my dad even joked at one point that we might get a real arcade machine in our basement someday. Of course, that never happened, but the dream never went away. But even back then, there was one system that stood out for me as the holy grail. That, of course, was the Neo Geo. It was the dream of having a perfect arcade experience at home. So fast forward a couple decades, I finally made it happen. I got my hands on a Neo Geo AES. That's the home system. Got it out of Japan. Had a box with the foam inserts, the whole thing. Got a bunch of games for it. Really cool. Got into like Neo Geo Pocket Color, some other Neo Geo stuff. But eventually, I found a 2-slot Neo Geo MVS stand-up arcade cabinet. So I got that puppy home, wedged it into my basement, cleaned it all up, fixed a whole bunch of crap, got it working, and it was great. But it wasn't enough. I wanted to go further with Neo Geo and get the best Neo Geo possible, at least in my mind. That was the Neo Geo Hyper 64 that you've never ever heard of, because the Hyper 64 was SNK's foray into 3D polygon based gaming. Basically, I think they wanted to take on Sega during the, when they were doing the Virtua Fighter, that kind of stuff. Namco was doing Tekken, that kind of thing. SNK's version did not work out so well. It was expensive. The games weren't even that well received. They only made about half a dozen games total, as a matter of fact. But I got my hands on a new old stock Hyper 64 motherboard and a couple of games. Massive metal things are crazy. There were cartridges. They were cool as anything. But yeah, the whole thing was made out of metal, and it was just the coolest thing ever. Hooked right up into my Neo Geo MVS cabinet. Used the same JAMA harness, the whole thing. Hooked right in. Played perfectly. So it was so cool. I mean, I was living the dream, basically. I had my Hyper 64 polygon-based games like Fatal Fury, Wild Ambition, which I love, playing on my upright Neo Geo MVS cabinet. It was fantastic. And then life happened, and I had to sell it and move. So it didn't come with me. And I was without any form of arcade gaming at home for a while. I did dabble into building multicades, built a freaking huge one that probably weighed a couple 100 pounds. That did not come home either. That went to my former employer, and it's still there to this day. but I kind of was happy to let that go. It was well built, but not the prettiest thing, I would say. In any event, that's where the Hyper 64 part of my name was born. So Neo as in Neo Geo, Hyper 64 as in the Hyper 64 system. Neo Hyper 64 it is. But all this time, after I sold the Neo Geo cabinet, I didn't have a way to play to express my love for arcade gaming at home until, drum roll please, 2018, when Arcade 1-Up hit the market. And probably much like a lot of you, there was something I found really interesting about the idea. It's affordable, licensed, easy to build. Suddenly I could be into arcade gaming again. Sort of. Over time, I discovered, like just about everyone else, they left a lot to be desired. We don't have to go into all the problems. They're well documented. In fact, I probably did my share of documenting all of them on Reddit over the years. But over time, and to their credit, they improved to the point where we eventually got the Pac-Man XL, which isn't half bad. Yeah, it's a Pac-Man, but it's a good Pac-Man. Looks like Pac-Man. Looks a lot better, in fact, than most of what they released, because it actually looks like an arcade machine. And that's what I wanted. So, unfortunately, that's also kind of where they stopped doing really cool stuff. We haven't had very many efforts like that since. But here we are several years later. It's 2025. And while Arcade 1-Up has clearly lost steam, they did lay the groundwork for the home arcade space. They showed us what's possible with XL, and that's what brings us here. We are entering home arcade 2.0, or whatever other term you want to use for it. But we've got new companies, new licensing deals, even a new way to get stuff into people's homes with direct-to-consumer. All of which brings us to the topic of this video, which is why another YouTube channel. This is why. Because I wanted a place to share what I'm learning with the proper context. And that's hard for me to do on places like Reddit, Facebook, whatever. I also only wanted a place that focuses on this kind of stuff. Maybe not so much the claw machine, but the other stuff, the video arcade machines. I love and appreciate home consoles, handhelds, pinball, VR, all of that stuff as much as anybody else. I've owned a lot of those things, especially home consoles and handhelds. Even had a virtual pinball, but that's not the focus of this channel. There's lots of other great channels that cover that stuff, and I'd urge you to check them out. They're fantastic. So while I love that stuff, my real passion is what you see behind me, and that's going to be the focus of this channel. But at the beginning of this video, I promised you 3 specific reasons why you might want to visit. So I want to talk about those 3 things. Number 1, firsthand info. When I report on news, it's from information I've gathered myself, talking directly to people in the industry. That could be retail, licensing, design, marketing. I have contacts in all those areas at several different companies. This is not a place for friend of a friend rumors or just repeating what other content creators are saying or speculating. There is a place for that. And I love that stuff as much as anyone. And you'll see me on their channels watching and commenting along with it. And sometimes you'll hear that here as well. The difference is I won't repeat someone else's speculation as fact unless I can also confirm it for myself. But that brings me to the second point, which is transparency. Because I'm not always going to get it right. Even when I confirm something, I might misinterpret what I've heard. Or Sometimes what's factual one day changes the next. A company that has a license one day, they might lose it 3 weeks from now. A company that decides we're going to look at producing this title 3 months from now might not ever bring that title out because maybe nobody picked it up. Maybe a retailer didn't want it. So as much as I'd like to get things right all the time, that will never, ever happen. And I'm going to own up to that as much as I am aware of when it happens. So if I get things wrong, I'll tell you about it. That's going to be the transparency that I want to deliver. And when I'm speculating, I'm going to tell you that too, because there's a lot of stuff, obviously, that I don't know, but I'm still going to want to speculate about it based on information that we have. And that brings me to the third point, which is context, because a lot of this is based on getting the context right. So when I share information, first thing might be to ask, why am I getting this information now? And what does it mean? In other words, if, let's say, brand A has a product launch that just happened and someone from brand B shares a piece of information I hadn't heard before, why? Is that timing coincidental? Or is it because brand B maybe wants to change the conversation, or maybe even tell me about something related to brand A that could be seen as detrimental? Who knows? In other cases, it might be like, hey, let's put up a survey about this. Well, why? What's behind that survey? Is someone doing market research? Probably. And they're using us for that? Probably. Okay. So this gives me an opportunity to give you that context, at least as far as I've learned it. That's hard to do on a place like Reddit, where I can throw a survey up there, but it's hard to explain the whole context behind that. And frankly, most people won't care or even read it. And in fact, I've found that out quite a lot, where I've often explained things and people in the comments will still say, hey, you did this and this. And I'm like, well, did you even read it? Because that's how it is. And we're all like that. So I get it. But context matters. And that's the third thing I want to provide. So those are the goals for this channel in a nutshell. But there is one other thing I wanted to acknowledge. And I find this really funny, but I kind of like it. Not everything I share is going to be earth-shattering. In fact, most of it will not be. You might call that a nothing burger. I would too. In fact, I actually thought about calling this channel Paul's Nothing Burgers. I didn't, but maybe I should have, because I think that'd be hilarious. In any event, a lot of what I'm going to share will be considered a nothing burger by many, and that's A-okay with me. For example, I might share the quality of buttons. Maybe they're Sanwa clones. I might share cabinet dimensions. Maybe the depth is a certain size that I wanted to confirm. Maybe I'm going to share, roughly how many units are made, so we have an idea of expected, popularity of this unit and how much they have confidence in what they're doing. Any of those things by themselves, or even all three together, may not matter to a lot of people. And in fact, it might even be seen as disappointing if I say I have news and that's what I share, and they're thinking I'm going to announce some great big product launch. Of course, that's disappointing. I get it, And in fact, those three examples I gave are exactly what happened on a show that I was on. The expectation was something big. Those were three of the things that I had to talk about, which were big to certain individuals who asked me to find that information. But for everyone else, not so much. And in hindsight, it probably would have been better to share it in a different way, like maybe my own channel. So here I am, sharing that kind of information. Some of it is going to be tiny, some of it will be bigger. I'm not going to make the decision. You guys can decide how important it is to you. In fact, that applies to pretty much everything I'm going to share. I'm not always going to say for certain that something is true or that it's unbiased or whatever. I'm not the Wall Street Journal. I'm not a journalist, period. But I'm going to give you the information as it's given to me. I'll put it in context as much as I'm able, and then I'll let you decide. You have as much intuition about these things as I will. We're all adults. We can draw our own conclusions. You don't need me filtering stuff just because I may not think you're ready for it or whatever. If it was given to me and it's relevant, I'll give it to you. And I'll give you the same context that I have so you can draw your own conclusions. And I think that's fair. So if that sounds fair to you and you're interested in information, big and small, then I'd welcome you to join me on this journey. I think we're going to have a lot of fun following the breadcrumbs from one big release to another and just seeing what comes next and hopefully pushing for some better products along the way. And until next time, thanks for joining me here on Neo's Arcade News.